Hi again, everyone. It's your boy Brady here from Inner Strength Check. I just had to turn my fan down because stop running some programs on my computer because it was doing a bit of ASMR fan whirring in the background. So I just wanted to give an update on, actually introduce a bit of a, I wouldn't say it's a major project, but for me it's a bit of an undertaking. So, in terms of practicing what I preach with regards to tabletop role playing games and the sort of challenges for me and some tips and strategies around that as a GM, I figured I'd get into some brand new processes to kind of demonstrate my journey with a new system and to kind of be brave and try several different things, including learning a new system as I go, kind of live, learning how to adapt a setting to a system, and perhaps doing some streaming around that, which kind of gives me performance anxiety at the very thought of that, but it's okay. So essentially what I was thinking of doing, it's kind of multifaceted, which considering my brain is no surprise to anyone, I don't think. And I don't mean that in terms of, oh, it's an overly ambitious thing, but perhaps it is. So the gist of it is that I want to use Ironsworn, which was a made for one player or co-op, or with a GM, but primarily solo or co-op tabletop role-playing game. It's free. It was developed by a man named Shawn Tomkins. He has an updated version which is more science fiction equivalent in Starforge. The Kickstarter is on now. I believe it may be over. He's gone well over the goal, their stretch goals, all the stretch goals with that on Kickstarter. So congratulations, Shawn. And just reading through the book and a cursory book and just throwing some dice and stuff like that, I found it like incredible how intuitive it felt to play by myself. I never thought that I would be playing a tabletop role-playing game by myself, but I had a bit of a go at it, and so it's a little brief spiel on the Ironsworn system, and then how I'm going to sort of modify it as I go along, and what else I'll be bringing into it. It's a game system which runs off the role-playing game design framework powered by the Apocalypse, which was developed by Miguel Baker and Vincent Baker for Apocalypse World, which was later used in Dungeon World and other RPGs. I really recommend giving Apocalypse World a read as a GM or a player, and especially Dungeon World. They've got some fantastic mechanics in there that I think can really spice up your game mastery, your gameplay. I haven't really adapted mechanics from either of those into campaigns that I've run because of I guess I have some confidence issues with, I hear a lot about GMs and DMs hacking systems, and this is sort of an experiment in that for me, but easing into it in a transitional way. So what I mean by that is, going back to the beginning, is that Powered by the Apocalypse games are centered on, they're pretty rules light compared to something like Dungeons and Dragons or their BattleTech especially. A lot more, abstracted and rules light, which fits into solo gameplay, which doesn't, when you think about it. I mean, if you're wanting to play a role-playing game by yourself, if it's too open-ended, you potentially run maybe it's not a risk of it becoming a headcanon narrative, right? Or storytelling or journaling, which is also fine as a creative writing prompt. But in Ironsworn, it's been adapted to a fantasy setting, which is pretty, I wouldn't say grimdark, but it's fairly low fantasy as is. It's about swearing to undertake perilous quests in a dark fantasy setting of the Ironlands. So there's a lot of different ways to go about the preemptive world building. So there are things such as truths, which there are some prompts for those. So that's sort of, there's a big section on how does magic come into the setting? Is it a low magic setting? Is it a D&D style hyper fantasy? Is it like the Force? How is iron itself used? How are iron vows used? Because to direct your main quest line, the fiction is centered around swearing an iron vow, which informs kind of your main quest line. And then you can swear other vows, and there's bonds and things like that. But look, it's pretty excellently designed. So my thoughts are that I'm actually going to run through the system, which has its own kind of prompts and oracles and generators and stuff. And I'm going to blend that with generators and things from other systems and my own imagination, not totally relying on RMG. But I'm kind of stuck as to whether I'm going to do the preemptive world building live, so like actually streaming it on Twitch or what have you, or whether I'm going to dial it back and actually do some videos and maybe use that as a practice to edit videos, so they've got a bit more of an aesthetic and it's not just me talking to the camera. Now, in terms of how that's going to pan out, it's going to pan out in, I think, several-fold ways. So I've ordered the physical decks and books for Ironsworn for print on demand from Drive-Thru RPG, which is awesome. You can order hardbacks or softbacks, and DTRPG will print through their affiliates and actually send it to you wherever you are in the world. So that's really handy for me. I missed out on pledging Ironsworn on my Kickstarter pledge for Starforged, but also that was kind of tactical because I thought I want to play sooner. So it could be between 3 and 8 weeks before I receive those. And in the interim, I wanted to actually get started on playing Ironsworn proper in the vanilla setting. So the way that I'm going to go about that is that I've already done some preemptive kind of world building on truths of the setting, and I've done some prompts around where my character will be, not potentially who that character will be. It's a little more abstracted again from the sort of, Pathfinder style structural builds of characters, but I've got a character in mind. I haven't generated a name. I've made some stats. I've got an idea of what he will be and where he will be and what he'll be doing. But I figured that, looks like I'm gonna have to edit now because Samsung closed the app. So where were we? I think that we were at the beginning of my character's quest, so I won't go into that, but there are certain truths within the system around what the old world was like, because essentially with the system, Ironlanders are basically inheritance to a new land that can be as verdant or as kind of grim and desolate as you'd like, which feeds into the next setting, which I'll get into in a minute. So I chose to I'm going to talk a little bit here about the truths of my version of the Ironlands. So the old world was beset by, and I know this sounds so kitsch with the pandemic, but the old world was beset by a sickness and a plague, which there's some rumors of potentially either undeath or brain death. And in that was a capacity to exert coercion and control. And I'll talk a little bit about neuroscience of that. I don't know if any of you remember a certain notorious figure in the past that used a drug to try and control one of their victims. But it's going to be a little bit like that. In terms of iron itself and the Ironlands, it's a bleak it's a bleak place. Very much. There are areas with good resourcing that are safe, but mainly it's a cold, grim, and wet setting. In terms of legacies, there are some. If you know anything about Elder Scrolls, the Iliad or the Dwemer, so a kind of ancient pre-Firstborn, and Firstborn are sort of the nickname, I guess, for elves or elf adjacents, and I think I'll kind of re-flavor that a bit, because elves are a bit, whatevs, you know. Like, it's not my thing. I'm essentially not that big on fantasy in general, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. In terms of communities, the communities are going to be mostly circles, which is sort of Shawn's conception of villages. Mostly larger villages, but I guess unlike the setting and even with the bleakness of the land, I'll actually be incorporating some larger towns and cities into my world. And those I'll actually either generate at the table alongside people, so even if you want input, and maybe I'll leave it to the viewer, which way should I take? Should I stream so that you can join in on the stream and actually give some suggestions and we can bounce off each other and perhaps even do some cooperative gameplay? Or would it be better to have things set up and kind of in a series? For instance, I recommend the Me, Myself and Die Ironsworn series. It's super well produced, actually. Like, getting near Critical Role, but it's one guy who's a voice actor. In terms of leadership in that world, sort of, if you think of Fallout, there's an overseer role, which is ratified by basically small scale elections. So I've got some general background, and that was just, I didn't even think of any of that. That was just prompts from the lists of what are the truths of your world. So you've got an emergent setting right there. So what I'm thinking is twofold. Now, the second aspect, which is the actual kind of porting or transcribing or whatever you want to call it, hack of setting, is going to be, I've been thinking about adapting the role-playing game from PC called Kenshi, because it's amazing in terms of the emergent gameplay, the sandbox sort of opportunities that come out of playing. It's the freedom in that game is incredible. It is the most definitively open world game I've ever played. It's a very brutal setting. It's a difficult game. You could be a thief, you could be a trader, you could be a caravaneer, you can be a warrior, you can be literally anything that you want, really. But the setting itself, it's kind of a post-apocalyptic setting that is a mix of Fallout with some kind of alt Earth technology and a fantasy setting. So you've got, similar to Numenera actually, if you know anything about that system, except not a billion years into the future. And it is set it's set on an alternate planet. I believe it's a moon even. And there's factional systems, there's a religious faction, there's some strange creatures. And so I'm thinking, while I wait for the physical product of Ironsworn itself, maybe I can get started on actually playing the game. Now, I've seen people playing the game and it's them streaming, and it has them sort of with, they've got their webcam up, they've got Google Sheets and things as they go. I've seen others that are a bit more lo-fi, and apart from the difficulty of flipping backwards and forwards through books, and that potentially maybe being a little bit more stilted to watch in action, I'm actually thinking maybe I'll put my money where my mouth is and actually do it literally on paper, including some note taking, and in terms of flavor and background, like as I'm streaming or as I'm playing, if I'm editing, I actually have my PC set up because I'm recording off my phone, and just do a quick look up this, and this is the element, because I think the strongest element of my GMing is the world building, the narrative, and like character voicing and stuff. I'm really bad with mechanics. I often fuck those up. I feel really self-conscious about it. It actually impacts my self-esteem about my ability to GM, and I nearly quit the hobby over it. I'm not mathematically minded. I'm not details oriented. I'm not conscientious, which is a good segue, I think, into basically going through this as a lived experience thing, watching someone, I mean, due to the ADHD, but also, I guess, my mental health and things like that, but also the tools and strategies and, generators and systems that can really help with the world building aspect of and play aspect. Because I think at this stage I'm a little reticent to have players in games that I'm running recorded so much yet. So I thought I'd strike out on my own for a bit. So my options are, for the Kenshi thing, because I can just play the PC game, I may stream a series of Kenshi, and I would probably make that more text based, although I may join in on webcam or voice. We'll see what happens. Australian internet being what it is, perhaps not. So in tandem with, I guess, doing a little bit more sort of in-depth test play of the Ironsworn tabletop role-playing system, while I'm waiting for the physical product to arrive, actually playing Kenshi. Now, I have a character in mind for Kenshi, and it's a little insectoid person who's a bit of a sort of a what they call a machinist, a little bit more of a scholar, which is dangerous in that setting, because the setting is, there's bandits, there's cannibals, there's all sorts of monsters and things like that. It's, I wouldn't say grimdark, but it's not far off. It's been described as dungeon punk, but it's a dangerous setting, which I think lends back into the description of Ironsworn. I think they blend well, and I'm going to have to essentially look at things like assets, which are the sort of not fabrication, the come on words, the equivalent of items. And there's companions, like there's whole things that you can abstract and make your own, and Ironsworn gives you rules for those, so maybe I'll go through that as part of my Ironsworn playthrough. But I think it would be cool to run through Kenshi, the actual video game itself, and maybe inject a tiny bit of world building and lore in there, because the game has its own lore, and use that as kind of a staging, if you're wanting to follow me through this process, for the actual Kenshi campaign. So let me know which tack you'd think would be better. Do you feel that watching a Twitch stream ad hoc would be better than, say, some edited videos? Because again, with my editing, it may not be the most concise anyway. Or alternatively, would you prefer to kind of watch the post production, I guess, of the narrative, which might buy me time, but also might be a bit of an extra, not responsibility, but an extra kind of plate to juggle. But this is also an exercise in me overcoming my fear of video editing as well as my fear of like trying a new setting and trying new systems in front of people. So it's a good iterative process, and Kenshi lends itself so well to emergent storytelling. Like I encourage you to go on YouTube and just search people's playthroughs. I mean, there's even one where a guy played a dog the whole time, a bone dog. So I'll also bake into the Ironsworn stuff and the Kenshi stuff some other supplements that I'll be looking at using, such as Kevin Crawford's Worlds Without Number, Stars Without Number, and other dust systems. And more for like, let's roll some tables and see what happens. How do we make sense of this? This whole thing will be, how do you and I make sense of this in a very collaborative fashion? So it's not top down. You know, you can feel free to make questions, ask comments, roll up an NPC, suggest what happens next. I want it to be kind of breaking the fourth wall and interactive too. So I think this could be an interesting little project, and yeah, I'm interested to hear what people's general preference would be, and I guess I can always test edit some videos to see how time consuming that is for me and the difficulty curve. If it's a bit much, I might back off and move to more of a streaming style for the tabletop as well. And would you be more interested in, say, an analog format or a digital format or a mix of the two? Because I'm happy to do any. I'm even happy to break out some minis and some maps and stuff for it, which I'll have to go through some boxes, but I'm keen to do whatever. So if you're interested in this idea, let me know. You don't have to like and subscribe or whatever. If you're interested in that prospect, and if you have suggestions around which way it could be cool to go, I mean, I'm, as the GM, I've got fiat on how it pans out, but if you've got suggestions, if you want to have a look at any of those systems or the setting, if you want to even chuck in NPC names, town names, nation names, like, go for it. This is a collaborative world building exercise too for you. And who knows, like, if we get good at the game and you want to regularly jump in, maybe it can be a co-op as well. So join me on that process and watch me delve into, pun intended for Ironsworn players, a new level of nerdery I'd not ever thought possible, playing tabletop role-playing games by myself. So yeah, stay tuned.